Hello you, and welcome to the latest volume of Ask a Brit. This indeed is volume 57. Can't believe it's been a month already since the last one, since the Christmas one, but a lot has happened since then, including lots of Vlogmas videos back in the day, and also quite a few videos this month, and a lot of research in between all of that. So it's just been madness, and I can barely remember even doing the last episode of Ask a Brit, but this particular episode is going to be concerning the topic of American geography. That is in fact the topic I put firstly to my patrons on Patreon, and anybody that becomes a patron gets to see those Ask a Brit topics before anybody else. And then, of course, I put it out to you fine people on YouTube and across social media, on our Instagram, which you can go to by following us here, as well as Twitter and Facebook. So, like I said, American geography has been the name of the game for this episode. You threw forth your questions, and American geography is something I've given a lot of thought to in recent times. A good number of my videos during Vlogmas and thereafter have sort of dealt with that through my GeoGuessr games and some of the trivia games that I've done, and also, with plans to travel as well further into the future to other parts of America. So a lot of this is in my brain, and it's been in my brain since I was a child. I mean, I've always been fascinated with just geography in general, really, but American geography always caught my eye. It had such a sort of diversity to it. Seemingly at first glance, I think when you look at the American map, it has a sort of logical layout to it, and then when you delve deeper, you find that there are some illogical elements to it, and both of those facets I always find quite fascinating. But without further ado, let's get underway with our first questions of the day. All right, first question comes from Will on Patreon, and Will asks, what, if anything, speaking of my life in Britain, what, if anything, are Brits taught in school about American geography, and did what you learned in those schools match what you experienced when you came here? So I don't have too many memories, really, of learning sort of geographical aspects of the United States in school. We did learn a little bit about American history, and not so much about the British involvement in that history, I have to say. It's more about Native American history, and then just a few things thereafter, but not too much. At least the school I went to. Schools will be different, generations will be different in how they teach that. And I suppose, I could say as well that when I was at school, my inclination toward learning is not quite what it is now. I think I've become more curious the older I've gotten. So it could be that we were taught quite a few things and I just didn't take it on board. I will say, though, that even at that age at school, even though I didn't have this inclination toward learning necessarily while we were in the classroom, I was more interested in having fun and throwing paper at people, right? But I did have this interest, weirdly, outside of school in the US, in its geography and many other aspects of its makeup, that I think I got from my dad. My dad was and is sort of interested in naming the 50 states, for example. And so I did learn quite a lot about the 50 states from a book that I stole from my school's library, ironically. And that was when I was, a young man, 11 or 12 years old. And I think, that just gave me sort of a geographic picture, or even a geological picture of what the United States looked like. And so my expectations have been somewhat met in that regard. So in that sense, it met its expectations. What doesn't meet expectations all the time is how America is presented in film, or the films that we get, but that's more to do with sort of societal aspects or cultural aspects, not really the geography of the United States. But it's like I said in a video that I did a few weeks ago, the geography, the actual layout of the American map is different in picture as it is in your mind, I think. I picture certain elements of it quite different. For example, I would not in a million years have believed that Atlanta, Georgia was west, or more to the west, than Detroit, Michigan, for example. Okay, and next question also comes from Patreon. This is from Jeff on Patreon, who asks, you've talked a lot about the states that you visited and the ones that you want to visit, i.e. all of them, of course. But what geographic features of the US do you particularly want to see? So this is kind of a tough question to answer because, you could almost throw geology in with geography in this sense, in terms of sort of rock formations or just elements of the earth doing its beautiful thing in this country. The Grand Canyon is obviously a massive draw and something that I truly want to see, I think. But if we're talking about different states, I've talked about Oregon, I've talked about Washington Washington State. I like the sound of the Pacific Northwest. It seems to be something I'm used to in terms of its climate and all of that. And then if we're literally talking about the geographic border of a place, then I'd be interested, if only for the novelty of it, to see the Four Corners Monument and to go through 4 states within a second. That would be fun. But plenty. I mean, there's so much that I could say. I think from a cultural standpoint, my answer would be completely different if we weren't just literally talking about the geography of the United States. So much to see, much to learn. I'm still learning every single day, and hopefully that comes across. The next question comes from Donna on Twitter. Donna asks, and this is quite a specific question, some people think Long Island in New York is not an island at all, but a peninsula. Can you find out what my landmass is? So this is an interesting one, isn't it? So Wikipedia, the bastion of accuracy that it is, says that it is an island. It absolutely refers to it as an island throughout. But I did do some research into this, and a court ruling from about 1985 voted it down, said it's not technically an island. But then I just looked at it on Google Maps because I was curious to see if it was just slightly adjoined to the rest of New York. And it looks like it only is through man-made structures, as far as I can tell, like bridges and the like. Either way, Donna, I've had the great pleasure of visiting Long Island on more than one occasion, although one of those was just to go to JFK Airport. But I've been out into Queens and all of that, and cannot wait to get back and visit more of not just that part, but all of the surrounding areas, really. More of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and the Atlantic. Let's go swimming. Okay, next question. This comes from YouTube, and it is from Bizawai. And Bizawai asks, is there any place in the US you've been to that is similar to where you are from? And what terrain so far has been most different? And what terrain have you enjoyed the most? So I think if we're talking about this from a geographical standpoint, a place that's most like where I'm from, it's a hard one to say, because in terms of weather, you know, I got a few English vibes, actually, weirdly enough, in San Francisco. But that was about the end of those comparisons. I mean, we certainly don't have palm trees en masse in the UK. And it's, you know, just the general makeup of San Francisco is quite a lot different to most parts of the UK that you'd see. So I couldn't really include that. I suppose the thing is that the United States, just from a geographical or even geological standpoint, is quite vastly different all across the country to the United Kingdom. I mean, whenever I'm playing GeoGuessr, put it this way, if you just randomly, out of all of the countries in the world, just plop me there and I open my eyes, I think I'd more or less know I was in England, or at the very least Britain, so Scotland or Wales. And same really if you dump me somewhere in the United States, although I should say that occasionally I'm playing GeoGuessr and I think that I am in the north of the United States, potentially Canada, and it turns out it's Sweden. So there's a lot of crossover geologically and geographically there. But for some reason, the United Kingdom just sort of, I don't know what it is. I mean, there's a certain level of Gremliness to how the United Kingdom presents itself that is just not really seen here. Gremliness, by the way, for those who don't watch, is a word that I coined, and I'm determined to get it in the dictionary one of these days. And it's just describing the greenness of a place. It's basically what cleanliness is for the word clean. I'm going to keep hammering this home until it's in the dictionary, right? Anyway, so no, I don't know. I think geographically, it's kind of hard for me to sort of pinpoint a place that would be of a similar ilk to the UK. I'll keep looking on my travels. Maybe I will find that. But the next question comes from Vicken. This is also on YouTube. Do you think you will ever drive the entire Route 66? And that's a question that's also asked by The Walker on YouTube. I'd love to at some point. I'm much in favour of trying out all of these kind of historic routes or trails, maybe the Oregon Trail, for example, sometime down the road, or at least a version of it. But Route 66, I've seen the signs for it, of course, here in Chicago on Lakeshore Drive, and it's always been something that's of great interest to me. I think I've actually passed through it en route to somewhere else as well, and just sort of stopped to take photos. But that was years ago, before I was ever making these videos, so unfortunately those photos are probably lost to time at this point. But there's always the future, and that's the great thing about time. You not always stuck in the past. This is turning into an entirely different video. We won't go down that road, as it were, pun intended. But yes, so anyway, Route 66, definitely on the bucket list. I'm sure I'll do it one day. Maybe I'll even cycle it with my bike. That's a long journey, but I have often talked about doing one end of the country to the other, and that's an even shorter distance than that. So who knows? All right, next question comes from Deborah on Patreon, and Deborah asks, Lawrence, have you ever or considered researching the background of the US state names? I expect that some, such as New York, are fairly obvious. However, I would imagine that some are likely more complicated. Might some be of interest to you? They're all of interest to me, and just to go back there to New York, it's not quite as straightforward as some people might think. I think usually people assume that New York is named directly after the city of York in the United Kingdom. That's actually not the case at all. It was named after the Duke of York, and it was named in his honour, not the city of York at all. So in that respect, he is one of 7 British monarchs after whom states were named, and I actually did do a video on those other 7 states and the origins of the state names, but there's a lot of places up and down the East Coast that are named after British monarchs or just British royalty in general. As I touched upon in the comment section of my previous video about Native American words, or words that Native America gave to the English language, there's a lot of places that have Native American influences in this country which are worth looking into. One's of Spanish origin, one's of French origin, as I just touched on, German. You know, it's a whole gamut of different influences on how things were named in this country, and I think that's one of the sort of interesting things about having such a diverse background of people that came here. They all sort of placed their stamp on the map, and sometime down the road I want to turn that into a series, really looking deep into the origin, because some of them are highly surprising origins, ones that you wouldn't quite expect, perhaps like New York, for example. I'm not sure that I would have expected that until I found that one out. So next question comes from Instagram. In fact, the next 3 comes from Instagram, and the first of those is from Caden Hunt, and Caden asks, which is your favourite national park? Well, in terms of national parks or national monuments or anything that's sort of been nationalized in terms of a place, you know, it's sort of hard to say, and I wouldn't really want to commit to giving an opinion just yet because I just haven't seen enough of them. I want to see more of them, obviously, and then pass judgment at that time, probably through a best-selling book, let's be honest. Just putting some feelers out there early on. But I will tell you about a national park, or a few national parks, that I want to see perhaps more than any others, and I think Yosemite has always been one, or at least since I learned how to pronounce Yosemite. I never knew who Yosemite Sam was when I was a kid. He was just one of those that passed me by. I don't know what it is, but Google Chromecast, right? It beams these images to us in our living room, and typically it shows us sort of national parks and sort of geological formations and geological splendor from around the United States. And every time Yosemite comes up, it's just so eye-catching to me, that particular type of rock that is so synonymous with Yosemite. And for some reason, I just want to get lost in Yosemite National Park. Big park, obviously, stretches for quite a bit of California, and that just seems really interesting to me. I touched on it earlier, but I would absolutely love to see the Grand Canyon and go canoeing, kayaking down there in the Colorado River. But those are some of the big names, aren't they? The big ones. But maybe it'll be some of the smaller ones. Maybe it'll be some of the state-based parks that might be of interest. I don't know, but we will see. I'll have my camera wherever I go, and I will bring you news from these places when I get there. It's going to be a process, I think. I mean, these things aren't going to happen overnight, and they haven't happened overnight. But I think the further we go with this channel, and the further it grows, the more that's going to help to get me to these places and to bring you a sort of a postcard view, as it were, of my time in those places. So I am looking forward to a future national park visit. Next question from Mr. Adam Sandler. Is it the real one? We don't know, but this comes from Instagram. And Mr. Adam Sandler says, why is the Midwest not in the mid or in the West? Well, at one time it kind of was, when America was sort of perceived differently from a geographical standpoint, because it hadn't quite made its full expansion west, or at least in terms of settlement and all of that, which is defined by the US government. government anyway, as these states. A lot of people dispute which states fall under the Midwest, but currently in the present day, in 2018, it is listed as these states. You can argue with that in the comments. I don't shoot the messenger. I'm just passing on what the US government has said. When the word Midwest was coined back in the 19th century, America was quite a different place. You know, westward expansion was happening from about the middle of the century, or just before the middle of the century onward. But, you know, there was even a time in American history when Ohio, the state of Ohio, was considered west. That was considered greatly west because most of early American history, of course, dealt in the sort of eastern portion of the United States. As we expanded further west, that name never changed. It just sort of stayed, and we've kept with it. But of course, I live there. I live in the Midwest. I live in the Midwest's largest city, or the most populated city, of Chicago, having previously lived in Indianapolis, which is one of the other sort of top 5, I believe. So in that sense, I've kind of seen the more urban side of the Midwest, but I've also seen the more rural side of it too. And you know, want to get out to some of the other states that you saw on that list. But, you know, speaking of the size of cities, that actually brings us on to our final question today. This comes from, it's a great question. It comes from the Ghost of Sabotage on Instagram. And the Ghost of Sabotage asks, what is the smallest town you've been to? And I think that's a really difficult one to answer. I mean, I've been to a lot of those sort of unincorporated towns, many of them in northern Indiana, just sort of stopping off really to stretch one's legs. But I don't know, it'd probably be one of those, I suppose, where you've got sort of 3 people and a chicken. I must say, though, I didn't clock it, and maybe I should. I think it's a point of interest because, I mean, what goes on in those small towns, you know? And maybe it's something worth looking into from a sort of trivia standpoint. You know, what is the smallest town in the United States? I think there's a place, isn't there, that has a population of 1 or 2 people. I think I read about it, or the electoral roll was something like 2, or something along those lines. But anyway, I should have looked that up prior to this video, but it only just came to me just now. But small towns, big towns, doesn't matter. Bring all the towns to me, not to me. Bring me to them. That would be better. I'll bring myself. I mean, that's more efficient for both me and you. You don't have to do any work then. You just get to watch. Thank you for watching this episode of Ask a Brit. Don't forget to join us for our next videos coming up throughout the month of January and also throughout the month of February. I mean, basically the rest of the year. I'm going to be doing this non-stop now for the rest of my life. That's it. Have a good day, and I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of Ask a Brit. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you'd like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.